I still remember the exact moment when everything changed. Sitting at that polished mahogany table, surrounded by the family who never truly accepted me, I asked a simple question about our upcoming reunion. The words barely left my lips when my brother David looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're not part of the family. Don't show up." Then came the laughter. Not just from him, but from everyone. My parents, my sisters, even the cousins. Their faces blurred through my tears as I quietly stood up and walked out of that restaurant. What they never knew was that for 3 years I had been silently funding their business loan through a blind trust. 4 days after that dinner, their loan payment mysteriously failed. That night, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I should probably start from the beginning. My name is Amanda Wilson, and despite being a successful financial advisor at 32, my family has always treated me like an unwanted houseguest. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, I was constantly reminded that I didn't quite fit the mold of the perfect Wilson daughter. The seeds of our estrangement were planted when I was 11 years old. My brother David, who was 14 at the time, broke our mother's prized crystal vase, a family heirloom passed down through 4 generations. When she came home and found it shattered on the living room floor, David immediately pointed at me. "Amanda did it," he said without hesitation. "I saw her playing with her softball in the house." Despite my tearful denials, my parents believed him. I was grounded for a month, forced to do extra chores, and worst of all, made to sit through weekly dinners where the story was retold to relatives as evidence of my destructive tendencies. Years later, when I brought it up, my mother waved it away. "Children break things, Amanda. You need to let it go." But it wasn't about the vase. It was about the lies. The way truth didn't matter when it came to maintaining the family narrative. As I grew older, the distance grew wider. When I was accepted to college on a partial scholarship, there was no celebration dinner like there had been for David. When I graduated with honors in finance, my parents attended but left immediately after the ceremony, claiming they had a more important engagement which turned out to be my cousin Heather's birthday party. Still, I tried. Year after year, holiday after holiday, I showed up with gifts and smiles, hoping something would change. It never did. I was always seated at the far end of the table, my accomplishments dismissed, my opinions interrupted or ignored. 3 years ago, I received a call from my Uncle Frank, who has always been slightly kinder than the rest. He mentioned in passing that the family business, a regional chain of furniture stores my grandfather had started, was struggling. They needed a loan guarantor with strong credit and assets, but no one in the family qualified. That night, I called my bank and set up a complex trust arrangement. Through this structure, I became the guarantor for their $2 million business loan without my name appearing on any paperwork they would see. I didn't do it expecting gratitude I knew they would never find out. I did it because despite everything, some irrational part of me still craved their approval, still believed that if I supported them enough, they might eventually see my worth. Last month, I discovered through social media that they had been holding annual family reunions at Lake Norman. 5 years of gatherings, 0 invitations. I told myself it was an oversight, that surely they wouldn't deliberately exclude me. When my sister, in law Bethany, accidentally mentioned the upcoming reunion to our mutual friend Tara, who then mentioned it to me, I decided to address it directly. I called my mother and asked if I could join them for dinner that Sunday. After a pause, she agreed, though her tone suggested she was doing me a tremendous favor. I spent $400 on a new dress, bought thoughtful gifts for everyone, and practiced what I would say during the drive over. I was determined to be positive, to rise above the past, to make this the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. The dinner started like all our gatherings, stilted conversation, subtle jabs disguised as concern. "Amanda, are you still single? At your age, you really shouldn't be so picky." And the familiar feeling of being a stranger among people who shared my blood but not my heart. When there was a lull in the conversation, I took a deep breath and asked as casually as I could manage, "Just tell me when the reunion is. I'd love to join you all this year." That's when David looked at me with that smirk I've known my entire life and said those words that still echo in my head, "You're not part of the family. Don't show up." The laughter that followed cut deeper than the words themselves. My father's booming guffaw, my mother's tittering giggle, my sister's synchronized snickering, a perfect harmony of cruelty. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry until I was in my car. I simply placed my napkin on the table, picked up my purse, and walked out. But here's what they don't know: I didn't actually leave the restaurant. Something stopped me at the door. Perhaps it was 2 decades of suppressed anger, or maybe it was simple curiosity. Instead of walking to my car, I turned and went to the restroom. I locked myself in a stall, sat on the closed toilet lid, and waited. 20 minutes later, I heard familiar voices as my family entered the restroom area. My mother and sisters were reapplying lipstick, unaware of my presence in the closed stall. God, did you see her face? That was Lily, my youngest sister. I thought she was going to burst into tears right there. Well, what did she expect? My mother's voice, cool and dismissive. She's always trying to insert herself where she doesn't belong. Remember when she found out about Dad's heart surgery last year? That was Karen, my other sister. She actually showed up at the hospital like she had a right to be there. At least she's good for some entertainment, my mother replied. And we should be thankful for whatever mysterious angel investor has been keeping the stores afloat. David says their loan terms are unbelievably favorable. Speaking of which, Lily lowered her voice, though I could still hear her clearly. Has David figured out who's behind that trust yet? Not yet, but he's working on it. Whoever it is, they've been our lucky charm. Now come on, they're bringing dessert, and I want to see if Amanda's still sitting in her car crying. They left, laughing again, unaware that I had heard every word. I sat there, numb, as the pieces clicked into place. They hadn't been accidentally forgetting to invite me to family functions. They had been deliberately excluding me for years, all while benefiting from my financial support. I waited until I was sure they had finished dinner and left before I emerged from my hiding place. The restaurant was nearly empty. The waitress gave me a pitying look as I walked out. She had obviously witnessed my humiliation earlier. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. The morning after the disastrous dinner, I woke up with swollen eyes and a clarity I had never experienced before. Years of making excuses for my family's behavior crystallized into a single, undeniable truth. They didn't deserve my support, financial or otherwise. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and scheduled an urgent meeting with my financial advisor and mentor, George Hampton. He had been my professor in graduate school and had taken me under his wing when I entered the financial industry. Unlike my family, George had always recognized my potential. His office was on the 23rd floor of a sleek downtown building with floor, 2, ceiling windows overlooking the city. George looked concerned when I walked in, my usual professional demeanor replaced by obvious emotional exhaustion. "Amanda, what happened?" he asked, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. I told him everything: the years of emotional neglect, the trust arrangement I had set up to guarantee the family business loan, and finally, the dinner and what I had overheard in the restaurant bathroom. George listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Amanda, I've known you for 10 years now. You're one of the most talented financial advisors I've ever mentored, but you have a blind spot when it comes to your family. What you've described isn't just hurtful, it's financial exploitation." "I set up the trust voluntarily," I reminded him. "Based on information from your uncle that may not have been entirely truthful," George countered. "And now that you know they're deliberately excluding you while benefiting from your generosity, continuing to provide this support would be self-destructive." He was right, of course. As a financial advisor, I would never recommend that a client maintain financial entanglements with people who treated them so poorly. Why had I made an exception for myself? "What do you suggest?" I asked. George outlined a plan to legally and responsibly remove myself as guarantor of the family business loan. It wouldn't be simple. The trust had been intentionally structured to be arm's length, but it was possible. The business would have 30 days to find a new guarantor once I withdrew. "They'll know it was me," I said, suddenly nervous. "Perhaps," George agreed. But you need to ask yourself if that matters more than your own financial and emotional well-being. After leaving George's office, I drove to Jessica Winter's house. Jessica had been my best friend since college, and she had witnessed firsthand the subtle cruelty my family had inflicted over the years. She was the one who held me when I cried after my parents skipped my graduate school graduation for a neighbor's barbecue. She was the one who encouraged me to set boundaries, even when I wasn't ready to hear it. Jessica's reaction to my story was less measured than George's. "Finally," she exclaimed, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I've been waiting years for you to stop setting yourself on fire to keep those people warm." Over glasses of wine in her kitchen, we talked for hours. Jessica reminded me of incidents I had downplayed or forgotten, entirely the time my mother forgot to tell me about my grandfather's funeral until the day after it happened. The Christmas when everyone received personalized gifts except me, who got a generic gift card. The countless times my accomplishments were dismissed while my siblings' minor achievements were celebrated lavishly. "This isn't about revenge, Jess," I insisted. "I just need to stop enabling them." "It's not revenge to stop someone from taking advantage of you," Jessica argued. "It's self-preservation." That evening, I began the complex process of disentangling myself from my family's finances. I contacted the bank that had arranged the trust and initiated the procedure to withdraw as guarantor. I reviewed the original documentation and discovered something I hadn't paid attention to before: a clause requiring quarterly financial statements from the business. Curious, I requested copies of all statements that had been submitted over the past 3 years. 2 days later, I received a thick envelope containing dozens of financial reports. Most people would find these documents impenetrable, but to me, they told a clear and troubling story. The family furniture business had been struggling, yes, but not for the reasons my uncle had implied. There were consistent withdrawals labeled as management consulting fees being paid to a company called DW Enterprises. The amounts were substantial, between $20,000 and $30,000 each month, and they had begun shortly after the loan was secured. A quick search revealed that DW Enterprises was registered to David Wilson, my brother. I dug deeper, comparing the business's reported inventory with their sales figures and purchasing records. There were discrepancies that suggested inventory was being sold without the revenue being properly recorded. Classic signs of embezzlement. My brother wasn't just excluding me from family events, he was actively stealing from the family business, the very business I had been helping to save. His financial desperation explained the increased hostility towards me. If I got too close, I might discover what he was doing. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was fraud, and I had unintentionally been enabling it. That night, I finalized the paperwork to remove myself as guarantor for the loan. According to the terms, the bank would notify the business of the change immediately, and they would have 30 days to secure a new guarantor or face default. As I signed the final document, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family for a long time. Not hope or hurt, but a quiet, resolute sense of justice. 4 days after I withdrew as guarantor, the first loan payment without my backing came due, and as I had anticipated, it failed. The first call came at 8:15 that evening. David's name flashed on my phone screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then came calls from my father, my mother, my Uncle Frank. I silenced my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. When the calls persisted into the next morning, I finally answered one from my father. "Amanda," he said, his voice strained in a way I'd never heard before. "We need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the business loan." "What kind of mistake?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "The bank is saying our guarantor has withdrawn. They're demanding we find a replacement within 30 days, or they'll call the entire loan due." He paused. "We don't know who the guarantor was. It was some kind of anonymous trust arrangement, but we thought you might be able to help, given your connections in the financial world." The irony was almost too much to bear. After years of dismissing my career as playing with other people's money, he was now asking for my professional help without even acknowledging their behavior at dinner. "I'm not sure what you expect me to do," I replied coolly. "For God's sake, Amanda, this is your family's business we're talking about. Your grandfather built this company from nothing. Don't you care at all?" I took a deep breath. Did you care when you all laughed at me at dinner? When David told me I wasn't part of the family? A long pause followed. Then, "Oh, Amanda, you're being oversensitive again. David was just joking around. You know how he gets after a few drinks." This was so typical, minimizing their cruelty, blaming my sensitivity rather than their behavior. "It didn't sound like a joke when you and my sisters were laughing about it in the restaurant bathroom afterward," I said quietly. Another, longer silence. "You were eavesdropping on us?" "I was in a bathroom stall. You came in and started talking about how I'm always trying to insert myself where I don't belong. How I showed up at the hospital during Dad's heart surgery like I had a right to be there. Your words, not mine." "That was a private conversation that you had no business listening to," my father snapped, his tone shifting from placating to angry in an instant. "Apparently, I have no business being at family reunions either. Or at Dad's bedside when he's having surgery. Tell me, what exactly qualifies someone as part of this family? Because it seems like sharing DNA isn't enough." "This isn't about that," he insisted. "This is about the business, about people's livelihoods, your grandfather's legacy." "The same grandfather whose funeral I wasn't invited to?" "That was a miscommunication." "No," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. "It wasn't. None of this has been a miscommunication or a joke or a misunderstanding. It's been deliberate, and we both know it. I can't help you with the loan. I suggest you talk to David about where all the money has been going." I hung up before he could respond. The calls continued throughout the day, growing increasingly desperate. David left voicemails alternating between threats. "You'll regret getting involved in this, Amanda. And please, sis, we're going to lose everything." My mother's messages were manipulative masterpieces, invoking family loyalty, my grandfather's memory, and thinly veiled guilt trips about the employees who might lose their jobs. By evening, I was emotionally exhausted. I called Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the therapist I had been seeing on and off for years, and scheduled an emergency session for the following morning. Dr. Reynolds' office had always been a safe space for me. With its soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and the gentle sound of a water feature in the corner, it was designed to put clients at ease. After listening to my account of recent events, she leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Amanda, what you're describing is a pattern of emotional abuse that has persisted throughout your life," she said gently. "Your family has consistently sent you the message that you don't matter, that your feelings are invalid, and that your only value is in what you can provide for them." "But they're still my family," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "Shouldn't family stick together no matter what?" "Family relationships, like all relationships, should be based on mutual respect and care," Dr. Reynolds replied. "When that foundation is absent, the relationship becomes toxic. You've spent years trying to earn their love through sacrifice and support. Has it worked?" I shook my head. "Then perhaps it's time to accept that their treatment of you isn't something you can fix through continued sacrifice. It's their choice, not your failure." That night, I lay awake, Dr. Reynolds' words echoing in my mind. Had I been chasing an impossible dream? Was I finally ready to stop trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it? My phone buzzed with a text message at nearly midnight. I expected another plea or threat from a family member, but the name on the screen surprised me. Taylor Wilson, my cousin. Taylor was 5 years younger than me and had always been somewhat removed from the family drama. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and she had split her time between her mother in California and her father, my uncle, in South Carolina. The message was simple. "Amanda, I just heard what happened at dinner. Can we meet tomorrow? There are things you should know, things they've been hiding from you for years." I stared at the message for a long time before replying with a time and place, a quiet cafe across town, far from any of the usual family haunts. Whatever Taylor wanted to tell me, I had a feeling it would change everything yet again. As I finally drifted off to sleep, my phone buzzed one more time. A voicemail from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to listen. "Miss Wilson, this is Thomas Blake from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding some irregular activity we've detected with your Social Security number on several loan applications. Please call our fraud department as soon as possible." My exhaustion vanished in an instant. What had my family done now? The cafe where I agreed to meet Taylor was a small, artsy place tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the corner with a clear view of the door. Despite having grown up in the same extended family, Taylor and I had never been close. She was 27 now, but I hadn't seen her in person since her high school graduation. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the awkward teenager with braces and uncertainty. The woman who approached my table carried herself with confidence, her dark hair cut in a stylish bob, her eyes the same Wilson blue as mine, sharp and observant. "Amanda," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, unsure what to expect. Your text was intriguing. Taylor ordered a latte, and I watched her carefully as she stirred in a packet of sugar. There was something in her manner, a nervous energy beneath the composed exterior that made me uneasy. "I've wanted to reach out to you for years," she finally said, looking up from her coffee. "But they told me you wanted nothing to do with the family, that you'd made that choice." I blinked in surprise. "They told you I chose to stay away?" Taylor nodded, reaching into her bag to pull out a thick manila folder. "They've been lying to me about you my entire life. Lying to everyone, really. It wasn't until I moved back to Charleston last year and started working at Uncle Jack's law firm that I began to piece things together." She pushed the folder toward me. "Your parents, your siblings, they've been systematically isolating you and manipulating the family narrative. I've collected evidence over the past 6 months. It's all in here." With trembling hands, I opened the folder. The first document was a copy of a trust agreement my college fund. According to the paperwork, it had contained over $100,000 by the time I graduated high school. Money I had never seen or been told about. "They diverted it to David's first business venture," Taylor explained quietly. "A sports bar that failed within 18 months. They forged your signature on the transfer documents." I continued flipping through the pages, each one revealing a new betrayal. Bank statements showing withdrawals from accounts I didn't know existed, letters addressed to me that had been intercepted. And most painful of all, a copy of my grandmother's will, which specifically left me her antique pearl necklace and a letter. "I never received either of those things," I whispered. "I know," Taylor said. "Aunt Margaret, your mother, claimed you refused them, said you wanted nothing to do with your grandmother's memory." I closed the folder, unable to look at any more. "Why are you showing me this now?" Taylor's expression softened. "Because I heard what they did at dinner. Because I'm tired of the lies. And because I found something last week that crossed a line even I couldn't ignore." She pulled out another, thinner folder from her bag and placed it in front of me. "They've been using your identity to secure additional business loans. Your Social Security number, forged signatures, everything. If the business fails, you'll be legally responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars." The cafe suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. I remembered the voicemail from the bank's fraud department. How could they do this? How did they even get my information? "Your mother still has all your childhood documents," Taylor explained. "Birth certificate, Social Security card. And David works with a guy who specializes in document recreation, if you know what I mean." I felt sick. This went beyond emotional cruelty, this was criminal. "There's one more thing you should know," Taylor said, her voice dropping even lower. "I wasn't supposed to attend that dinner either. I only found out about it when my dad called me the next morning, laughing about how David had put you in your place. When I asked what he meant and he told me what happened, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Before I could respond, the bell above the cafe door jingled. Both Taylor and I looked up to see Mrs. Eleanor Winters, my former high school English teacher, walking in. When she spotted me, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Amanda Wilson! I thought that was you," she said, approaching our table. "I saw you at Simmons Bakery last week, but you were on the phone and I didn't want to interrupt." "Mrs. Winters," I said, genuinely pleased to see her. "It's so good to see you. This is my cousin, Taylor." After exchanging pleasantries, Mrs. Winters hesitated, then asked, "Amanda, do you have a moment? There's something I've wanted to talk to you about for years. and seeing you twice in 1 week feels like a sign I shouldn't ignore it any longer." Curious, I invited her to join us. Mrs. Winters had been a bright spot in my high school experience, one of the few adults who seemed to see something special in me. "I never told you this," she began after sitting down, "but during your senior year, I nominated you for the Hawkins Scholarship for Promising Young Writers. It was prestigious, full tuition at any state university plus a stipend. And you won, Amanda." I stared at her in confusion, but I never. "I know," she interrupted gently. "When the committee called your house to inform you, your mother told them you weren't interested, that you'd accepted another scholarship already. I tried to contact you directly, but it was the end of the school year and then you were gone." I felt Taylor's hand cover mine on the table, a gesture of support as my world tilted yet again. "Why would she do that?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The pattern was clear now. "I've asked myself that question for 14 years, Mrs. Winters replied. "I even drove to your house to speak with you directly, but your mother insisted you didn't want to see me. Said you were focusing on your business degree and had outgrown your interest in writing. Writing had been my passion in high school, my escape. I'd filled dozens of journals with stories and poems, dreaming of studying creative writing in college. But my parents had insisted on a practical degree in business or finance. Writers don't pay bills, my father had said dismissively. I'd given in, believing I had no choice, since the small academic scholarship I'd received wasn't enough to cover housing and books on top of tuition. I never knew about the scholarship, I told Mrs. Winters. And I never stopped writing. I just do it for myself now. As Mrs. Winters left with my phone number and a promise to catch up properly soon, I turned back to Taylor, my mind reeling from these revelations. "There's more," she said softly. "So much more. People who've tried to reach out to you over the years. Opportunities that were intercepted. It's like they've been deliberately sabotaging your connections to ensure you remained isolated and dependent on their validation." My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. I glanced down to read, "Miss Wilson, this is Marcus Johnson. I was the office manager at Wilson Furniture from 215,220. I have documentation of tax fraud involving your brother David that you should see. Can we meet?" I showed the message to Taylor, who nodded grimly. "See? Once people realize you're finally breaking free from their control, you'll find there are a lot of people who want to help you piece together the truth." That afternoon, I met with 3 more people. Marcus Johnson, who provided evidence of David's systematic embezzlement from the company through fake vendor accounts. My grandmother's former nurse, who revealed my grandmother had asked to see me repeatedly in her final days, but was told I refused to visit. And finally, a lawyer specializing in identity theft and financial fraud. The lawyer, Stephanie Collins, reviewed all the evidence I'd gathered and confirmed what I already suspected. I had more than enough for both civil and criminal proceedings against my family. "The identity theft and loan fraud are particularly serious," she explained in her downtown office. "Those are federal crimes with potential prison time. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on most of these offenses. I don't know if I want to press charges," I admitted. "They're still my family." Stephanie's expression was compassionate but firm. "Family doesn't commit fraud against each other, Amanda. At minimum, you need to protect yourself from the financial liability they've created in your name. That means officially documenting these crimes, even if you ultimately decide not to pursue criminal charges." By evening, I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but there was one more unexpected development waiting for me. When I arrived at my apartment building, David's silver BMW was parked in the visitor section. He was leaning against it, his expression a practiced mask of contrition. "Amanda?" he called as I parked. "Please, can we talk?" I came to apologize. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let him come up to my apartment. Perhaps it was the sliver of hope that still remained, that he would genuinely acknowledge the hurt he'd caused, that there might be some explanation that could begin to make sense of years of cruelty. As I made coffee in the kitchen, I noticed David's eyes darting around my living room, taking in the details of my life. When I returned with 2 mugs, he was standing near my desk where my laptop sat closed. "Nice place," he commented. "Very. You." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in manipulation. David alternated between vague apologies, "I'm sorry if you felt excluded," minimization, "It was just a joke that went too far," and subtle blame, shifting, "You've always been so sensitive." When I didn't immediately offer to help with the loan situation, his friendly facade began to crack. "Look, Amanda, the business is in trouble. Real trouble. Dad's not well enough to handle this kind of stress. If we lose the stores, it'll kill him. Is that what you want?" "What I want," I replied calmly, "is for my family to treat me with basic respect and stop lying to me. What I want is for you to explain why you've been embezzling from the family business while I was guaranteeing its loans." David's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "DW Enterprises," I said. "The consulting fees, the inventory discrepancies. I'm a financial advisor, David. Did you think I wouldn't eventually notice?" He stood up abruptly. "I need to use your bathroom." While he was gone, a notification popped up on my phone, an alert from the security system I'd installed last year. It showed a live feed of my home office, where David was not using the bathroom, but instead attempting to access my laptop. I watched in disbelief as he tried several passwords, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, he gave up and quickly went through papers on my desk before actually flushing the toilet and washing his hands for show. When he returned, I gave no indication of what I'd seen. Instead, I stood and walked to the door. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly. "And David? Don't come back. We're done." His apologetic mask fell away entirely. "You've always thought you were better than the rest of us, haven't you? Miss Perfect with her fancy degree and her downtown apartment. Well, guess what? You're nothing without this family. Nothing." After he stormed out, I sat on my couch, surprisingly calm. The final piece had fallen into place. I now understood exactly who my family was and what I needed to do. I picked up my phone and called Stephanie Collins. "I'm ready to move forward," I told her. "All of it, the identity theft claims, the fraud charges, everything. I need to protect myself, and I need the truth to come out." As I hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was taking control of my own story. The Wilson Furniture headquarters was housed in a red brick building that had once been a textile factory. As I pulled into the parking lot the following Monday morning, I felt a strange mix of determination and sadness. This place represented my grandfather's legacy, a man I had loved but barely knew, thanks to my family's systematic exclusion. I was dressed in what Jessica called my power outfit, a tailored navy suit, subtle pearl earrings, and heels that added 3 inches to my height. In my briefcase were copies of all the evidence Taylor, Marcus, and others had provided, along with documentation from the bank confirming the identity theft and loan fraud. Stephanie Collins walked beside me, her presence both reassuring and official. We had agreed on a direct approach, confront the family together, present the evidence, and outline their options. Prison time could potentially be avoided if they agreed to a structured repayment plan and signed legally binding agreements regarding the fraudulent use of my identity. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. "Miss Wilson, I didn't know you were coming in today. I'm here to see my father and brother," I said calmly. "Is there a conference room available?" Before she could respond, my father emerged from his office, his face flushing with anger when he spotted me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "And who is this?" "This is Stephanie Collins, my attorney," I replied. "We need to talk, Dad. All of us. It's about the identity theft, the embezzlement, and the fraud. You can either discuss it privately with us now, or we can involve the FBI. Your choice." The color drained from his face as quickly as it had appeared. Without another word, he led us to the main conference room and instructed the receptionist to find David immediately. While we waited, I noticed my father's labored breathing and the way he kept pressing his hand against his chest. Despite everything, concern flickered within me. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Should I call someone?" He waved away my concern. "Just indigestion. Let's get this over with." David arrived minutes later, his confident stride faltering when he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table, Stephanie beside me with an open laptop and organized files. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between our father and me. Please sit down, Mr. Wilson, Stephanie said professionally. We have serious matters to discuss concerning fraudulent loan applications made in Amanda's name, systematic embezzlement from Wilson Furniture, and the illegal diversion of funds from trusts established for Amanda's benefit. As Stephanie methodically presented the evidence, bank records, forged signatures, falsified inventory reports, tax discrepancies, the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. David's expression shifted from disbelief to anger to fear, while my father sat unnaturally still, his breathing becoming more labored by the minute. "This is absurd," David finally exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can," I said quietly, sliding a particular document toward him, a copy of a loan application with my forged signature, alongside a forensic analysis confirming the forgery. "The bank has already confirmed these signatures are fraudulent. The FBI is very interested in pursuing this case." My father suddenly clutched at his chest, his face contorting in pain as he slumped forward. "Dad!" David and I exclaimed simultaneously. I rushed to my father's side, loosening his tie as David called 911. Despite everything they had done, the sight of my father in distress triggered an instinctive response. As we waited for the ambulance, I held his hand, monitoring his pulse and speaking calmly to keep him conscious. "Stay with us, Dad," I urged. "Help is coming." When the paramedics arrived, they quickly determined he was having a minor heart attack. As they prepared to transport him to Charleston Memorial Hospital, my father's eyes locked with mine. "Come with me," he whispered, his voice strained. "Please." Despite Stephanie's concerned glance, I nodded. "I'll follow in my car." The next hours were a blur of hospital corridors, medical terminology, and tense waiting. My mother arrived with my sisters, their faces transforming from concern to cold hostility when they saw me. "What are you doing here?" my mother hissed, pulling me aside in the waiting room. "Haven't you done enough?" "I was with him when it happened," I explained. "He asked me to come." "Of course he had a heart attack. You threatened him with the FBI." "Your own father!" Her voice rose with each word. "Is that what you wanted? To kill him with your accusations?" Before I could respond, David appeared from around the corner. He had been speaking with the doctors and now approached with an air of authority. "He's stable," he announced to the family, deliberately excluding me from his gaze. "They're keeping him for observation and tests, but the doctor says it was mild. He needs rest and no stress." He emphasized the last words with a pointed look in my direction. "You should leave," my mother said firmly. "You're not welcome here." I glanced toward my father's room, torn between respecting his medical needs and standing my ground. "I'll go for now," I finally said. "But this isn't over. The fraud needs to be addressed." As I turned to leave, I noticed David slip away from the group, phone in hand. A sense of unease prompted me to follow him at a distance. He ducked into an empty consultation room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I positioned myself just outside, able to hear his conversation. "It's me," he said in a low voice. "I need access to Amanda's accounts immediately. Yes, all of them. Use the information I gave you last week. I don't care what you have to do, just get it done before she can freeze everything." My blood ran cold. While our father lay in a hospital bed, David was attempting to access my financial accounts, likely using the personal information he had tried to obtain during his visit to my apartment. I slipped away before he could discover me and immediately called both Stephanie and my bank. By the time I reached my car, all my accounts had been frozen and security alerts placed on my credit report. David's attempt to financially sabotage me had failed. But the family crisis was far from over. As I drove home, my phone filled with text messages from extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, all expressing shock and anger at what they'd been told, that I had caused my father's heart attack by threatening the family business with false accusations. The family smear campaign had begun, and it was spreading rapidly through our small community. That night, exhausted and emotionally drained, I called Jessica. "They're telling everyone I made up lies about them to get revenge," I told her, fighting back tears. "That I deliberately stressed Dad into a heart attack. People I've known my entire life are believing them." "Of course they are," Jessica replied. Your family has been controlling the narrative for years. But Amanda, you have something now that you've never had before. What's that? Evidence. Facts. The truth. And people who are willing to stand with you while you fight for it. She was right. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this battle. I had Taylor, Marcus, Mrs. Winters, Stephanie, George, and Jessica herself. People who knew the truth and were willing to help me prove it. As I hung up, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice anymore. It was about finally claiming my own life, free from manipulation and lies. The next morning brought news that my father had been discharged from the hospital. It also brought something unexpected, a brick through my apartment window with a note attached. Family traitor. As I swept up the glass, my hands trembling with shock and anger, I realized the stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just character assassination. It was escalating into something potentially dangerous. I called the police, filed a report, and then called Stephanie. It was time to take the offensive. No more reacting to their moves. From now on, I would be the one setting the terms. The vandalism of my apartment marked a turning point. In the week that followed, I lost 3 clients at my financial advisory practice due to rumors spreading through Charleston's tightly knit business community. 2 were longtime family friends who told me bluntly that they couldn't support someone who would turn against their own blood. The 3rd simply sent an email transferring their account to another advisor, no explanation given. My professional reputation, built carefully over years of dedicated work, was being systematically dismantled. Each morning, I woke to new messages from people concerned about the stories they'd heard. Each day brought fresh evidence of how far my family was willing to go to discredit me. The final straw came when my apartment building's management called to inform me that several residents had complained about my disruptive lifestyle and questionable visitors, complete fabrications that somehow traced back to concerned community members who happened to be close friends with my mother. That evening, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the scattered remnants of my carefully constructed life. The blinds were drawn against possible surveillance. My phone rang constantly with calls from unknown numbers that I no longer dared to answer. My email inbox filled with messages ranging from concerned inquiries to outright hostility. I had hit rock bottom. For the first time since this ordeal began, I questioned whether fighting back was worth the cost. Perhaps it would be easier to move away, start over somewhere new, let them win this battle. That's when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Jessica standing there with 2 other figures, Taylor and George. Without hesitation, I let them in. "Intervention time," Jessica announced, placing a large bag of takeout food on my coffee table. "You haven't been answering calls or texts, so we decided to take matters into our own hands." George surveyed the state of my apartment with concern. "Amanda, this isn't like you. I've known you for 10 years and I've never seen you give up on anything." "Maybe this time I should," I said, my voice hollow. "They're winning. They've always won." Taylor, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke with unexpected firmness. "No, they haven't. They've just never had anyone stand up to them before. But that changes now." The 3 of them had not come empty-handed. As we ate the Thai food Jessica had brought, they outlined a coordinated plan to fight back, not with the same underhanded tactics my family was using, but with truth, strategy, and support. George had already spoken with several of his high-profile clients, counteracting the rumors with factual information about my professional integrity. Jessica had rallied our friend group to provide practical support, from security measures for my apartment to accompanying me to public events, so I wouldn't have to face potential confrontations alone. Most surprisingly, Taylor had been gathering additional allies from within the extended family, cousins, in-laws, and even some aunts and uncles who had their own histories of mistreatment at the hands of my immediate family. "You're not alone in this, Amanda," Taylor insisted. "The Wilson family ecosystem is built on fear and manipulation. Once one person stands up, others find their courage too." As they spoke, something began to shift within me. The fog of despair lifted slightly, replaced by a glimmer of determination. "There's something else you should know," George said, his expression serious. "I've been doing some digging into your family history, financial records, property transfers, birth certificates, the works." He hesitated, glancing at Taylor, who nodded encouragingly. "Amanda, according to the records I've found, your mother had an affair with your Uncle James Taylor's father around the time you were conceived." The room went silent. I stared at George, then at Taylor, unable to process the implications. "Are you saying—" "David isn't your brother," Taylor finished quietly. "He's your cousin, and so am I, but through your father's side, not your mother's." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Suddenly, so many things made sense: my mother's persistent emotional distance, the way my father would sometimes look at me with an unreadable expression, the stark difference in how David was treated compared to me. "Does everyone know?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Taylor shook her head. "I don't think so. My dad, your uncle, never mentioned it. I only found out because George contacted me with his suspicions, and I managed to find some old letters in my father's storage unit. Letters from your mother." I sat with this new truth, letting it settle into my understanding of my life. Strangely, instead of adding to my distress, it provided clarity. The pattern of exclusion and resentment had never been about anything I did or didn't do. It had been about covering up a secret that threatened the family's carefully constructed image. "This changes everything," I said finally. "And nothing. They still committed fraud using my identity. They still tried to destroy my reputation, but now I understand why." The next morning, I woke with a new sense of purpose. With the help of my small but dedicated support network, I began implementing a strategic response to my family's attacks. First, I hired a forensic accountant to thoroughly document every instance of financial misconduct involving the family business and my identity. Second, I worked with Stephanie to prepare formal complaints with the relevant authorities: the FBI for the identity theft, the IRS for tax fraud, and the State Banking Commission for the loan irregularities. Third, and perhaps most importantly, I began the process of reclaiming my narrative. With Taylor's help, I arranged meetings with key family members and business associates who had been fed false information. One by one, I presented them with documented evidence of what had really happened, never attacking my immediate family personally, but simply allowing the facts to speak for themselves. Some refused to believe me, their loyalty to my parents and David too deeply entrenched to be swayed by mere evidence. But others listened. Some even apologized for believing the worst about me without question. The tide began to turn slowly. My client list stabilized, then gradually began to grow again as word spread of my professional integrity in the face of personal challenges. My apartment building management retracted their warnings after several residents came forward to refute the false complaints. Through it all, I maintained a dignified silence in public about the specific details of my family's actions. When pressed, I would simply say, "This is a painful, private matter that unfortunately involves some legal issues. I hope we can resolve them and heal as a family." This measured approach frustrated my family's attempts to paint me as vindictive or unstable. When their smear tactics failed to provoke me into public retaliation, they escalated to more desperate measures. David attempted to file a restraining order against me, claiming harassment, but withdrew it when informed he would need to provide evidence in court. My mother began telling people I had a history of mental illness and had stopped taking medication, a complete fabrication that backfired when my longtime physician issued a statement refuting any such diagnosis. As their credibility eroded, their attacks became increasingly erratic and transparent. People who had initially believed their stories began to question the inconsistencies. Those who had known me for years through my professional work or community involvement found it increasingly difficult to reconcile their image of me with the person my family described. 6 weeks after my father's heart attack, I received an unexpected call from a lawyer representing my parents and David. "They want to meet," he said, "to discuss a settlement of all outstanding issues." I consulted with Stephanie, who advised caution. "They're on the defensive now. That's good. But don't go alone, and don't agree to anything without running it by me first." The meeting was set for a neutral location, a conference room at the Charleston Marriott. I arrived with Stephanie and George, steeled for whatever manipulation tactics they might attempt. My father looked older than I remembered, the heart attack having taken a visible toll. My mother sat rigidly beside him, her expression a careful mask of neutrality. David looked simply defeated, the swagger gone from his posture. Their lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Richard Blackwell, opened with conciliatory rhetoric about family healing and putting unfortunate misunderstandings behind us. Stephanie cut him off politely but firmly. "Let's be clear, Mr. Blackwell. We're here to discuss serious legal matters involving identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, and defamation. These aren't misunderstandings. They're documented crimes with significant potential penalties." The negotiation that followed was tense but productive. By the end of 3 hours, we had outlined the framework of an agreement: full financial restitution for all funds taken from me or obtained through my stolen identity, a legally binding commitment to cease all defamatory statements, a restructuring of the family business with external oversight, and my removal from any financial obligation connected to their enterprises. In exchange, I would not pursue criminal charges that could result in prison time. As the lawyers finalized the details, I found myself alone with my father in the hotel hallway during a break. For a long moment, we stood in uncomfortable silence. "Was any of it real?" I finally asked. "Did you ever actually love me, or was I just a reminder of something you wanted to forget?" He stared at the carpet, unable to meet my eyes. "You know the truth now, I suppose. About your mother and James." I nodded. "I tried, Amanda. In the beginning, I really tried. But every time I looked at you, I saw my brother's betrayal. It wasn't fair to you, but I couldn't separate the two. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly kind. But it was perhaps the most honest thing my father had ever said to me." "Thank you for that, at least," I said quietly. "The truth is better than pretty lies." As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting the burden of seeking approval from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. 1 year later, I stood in the backyard of my new home, watching as friends and chosen family gathered around tables decorated with wildflowers and twinkling lights. It was the 4th Saturday in July, the traditional date of the Wilson family reunion. But this was no Wilson gathering. This was something entirely new. After the settlement was finalized, I had used part of the restitution money to purchase a charming craftsman-style house in a quiet neighborhood. The renovation had been therapeutic, tearing down walls, removing old fixtures, and building something beautiful and strong from the foundation up, much like my life. My professional practice had not just recovered but flourished. Many clients who left during the smear campaign had returned, often with apologies, and brought new clients with them. I had even launched a pro bono financial literacy program for women leaving abusive relationships, helping them establish independence through financial knowledge and planning. Taylor had become a constant presence in my life, the sister I'd never truly had. We discovered shared interests and complementary personalities that created a genuine bond, one based on choice rather than mere blood relation. She had recently moved into a house just 3 blocks from mine. Several other relatives had tentatively reached out after the truth about my family's actions became impossible to deny. Some relationships were cautiously repaired, others remained politely distant. I welcomed those who came with sincerity and maintained boundaries with those who didn't. As for my immediate family, the aftermath of the settlement had brought significant changes. The furniture business had been restructured with professional management and strict financial controls. David had been removed from any position of authority, though he remained a shareholder. My parents had downsized to a smaller home after paying the required restitution. We maintained minimal contact holiday cards, occasional brief phone calls, nothing more. The wounds were too deep for full reconciliation, at least for now. Perhaps someday that would change. Perhaps not. I had made peace with either possibility. What mattered was that I no longer defined myself by their approval or acceptance. I had built a life filled with people who valued me for exactly who I was, not for what I could provide or how well I conformed to their expectations. Jessica approached with 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to me with a smile. "Happy anniversary of liberation," she toasted. It had become our private joke, marking the day I had finally broken free from the patterns of the past. As the evening progressed, I found myself sitting next to Mrs. Winters, who had become a mentor and friend. She was helping me rediscover my love of writing through a weekly workshop she hosted. "I spoke with your grandmother's nurse last week," she mentioned. "Mary told me something I think you should hear." I tensed slightly. Even now, revelations about my family could trigger old anxieties. "Your grandmother kept a journal her entire life," Mrs. Winters continued. "In her final days, she told Mary she wanted you to have all her journals, decades of them. She said you were the only one who would understand their value." "Did my mother intercept those too?" I asked, unsurprised. "Actually, no. Mary hid them. She knew what was happening and couldn't bear to see your grandmother's wishes ignored again. She's kept them all these years, waiting for the right time to give them to you." The next afternoon, Mary delivered 8 cardboard boxes to my house. Inside were leather, bound journals dating back to my grandmother's 16th birthday, nearly 70 years of daily thoughts, observations, and family history. As I carefully opened the earliest volume, a folded paper fell out, a letter addressed to me in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, dated just 3 days before her death. "My dearest Amanda," it began, "if you are reading this, then Mary has kept her promise, and these journals have finally found their way to you. I have watched for years as they pushed you aside, made you doubt your place, your worth. I was too much a coward to stand against them in life, something I will regret in whatever comes after. But perhaps these words can give you what I could, not the truth, that you have always belonged, always been worthy, always been loved. They can exclude you from gatherings and photographs, but they cannot excise you from this family's heart and history. That belongs to you as much as anyone. Perhaps more so, as you alone have had the courage to be authentic in a family built on appearances. Forge your own path, my girl. Build your own legacy. And know that wherever I am proud of the woman you have become." Tears blurred my vision as I carefully refolded the letter. In those boxes was more than family history. It was validation from beyond the grave, a hand reaching across time to offer the acceptance I had sought for so long. Over the following months, I read the journals chronologically, discovering a grandmother I had never fully known. Her insights, her struggles, her quiet rebellions against the family's rigid expectations all mirrored my own experiences in ways that were both painful and profoundly comforting. When I reached the entries from around the time of my birth, I found confirmation of what George and Taylor had discovered. My grandmother had known about the affair, had watched as my mother and father constructed elaborate pretenses to hide the truth, had witnessed the subtle ways they distanced themselves emotionally from the child who represented their shame. "The child deserves better," she had written. "Amanda deserves to be loved for herself, not punished for the sins of her parents." On what would have been my grandmother's 95th birthday, I made a decision. I selected excerpts from her journal's passages about resilience, forgiveness, and defining family beyond blood, and wove them together with my own experiences into a memoir. With Mrs. Winters' encouragement, I submitted the manuscript to publishers. To my surprise, there was significant interest. 6 months later, Blood and Choice, Redefining Family was released to critical acclaim and unexpected commercial success. The book struck a chord with countless readers who had navigated their own complex family dynamics. I was careful in my writing, never naming my family members directly or sharing details that would identify them specifically. This wasn't about revenge or exposure, it was about healing, about offering others the perspective that had ultimately saved me. Family should be defined by love and respect, not merely by DNA. My parents and David were furious, of course. They threatened legal action, though their lawyer quickly informed them that nothing in the book constituted defamation or violated our settlement agreement. I had been meticulously careful, and the story was fundamentally mine to tell. What they couldn't have anticipated was the wave of connection the book would create. I received thousands of messages from readers sharing their own stories of family exclusion, identity struggles, and the journey toward creating chosen families. Many found hope in my journey from desperately seeking approval to building a life defined by my own values rather than others' expectations. Among those messages was one that particularly touched me from a woman in her 70s who had worked for my grandfather when the furniture business was just getting started. "I knew your grandmother well," she wrote. "We were friends despite the differences in our positions. She would be so proud of you, not just for standing up for yourself, but for turning pain into purpose. That was her way too, though few ever saw it. On the second anniversary of my liberation, I hosted another gathering in my backyard. As twilight settled over the assembled friends, colleagues, and chosen family, I raised a glass. To all of you who showed me what family truly means, I toasted. Not those who share our name, but those who share our journey, who hold space for our authentic selves, who challenge us to grow but love us exactly as we are, who prove every day that family is built through actions, not accidents of birth. As conversations and laughter flowed around me, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my father, the first direct communication we'd had in months. "Your grandmother would be proud," was all it said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was an acknowledgement, a small crack in the wall of denial that had defined our relationship for decades. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, my happiness and sense of worth weren't dependent on their recognition or approval. I had found something infinitely more valuable, the courage to define family on my own terms, to build connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and to transform generations of pain into a legacy of authenticity and growth. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, I sat alone in my garden, listening to the night sounds and feeling profoundly at peace. The journey hadn't been easy. The wounds hadn't all healed. But I had discovered a fundamental truth that had changed everything. We can't choose the family we're born into, but we can absolutely choose the family we create, and in that choice lies freedom. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more authentic stories of resilience and growth, and share with someone who might need to hear that family is about love, not just DNA. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to create the connections that truly nourish your soul.